Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Once again, we will be going through this book, breaking it down verse by verse into logical, factual statements in English so we can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by the contents of his book, and more importantly for us non-believers, how does that affect us in the world, in our lives today? So before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts to the things I'm going to say or my factual accuracy, please first buy and read one of these. And after having done so, you'll recognise that everything I'm about to say to you now is 100% true and accurate of the words of Allah in his book and what Muslims believe today. So, if you've been watching the series and you watched the last one, you'll remember that we went through some kind of rudimentary threatening behaviour from Allah in his narcissistic foamy-mouthed rage, how he's going to punish the non-believers, and indirectly as well, kind of how he's going to punish his believers should they stop believing and doing what he tells them. And then the last thing we heard about is how the other religions are bad, nasty and not true, and he was throwing shade on the evil Satans, who are the Jews, and the rabble shepherds, who are the Christians. So, with that in mind, let's carry on where we left off. 23. Hast thou not turned thy attention to the Imams? They are invited to settle arguments with this Quran as their guide, but the evil Satans just deny it and go to discuss it with their allies, those Christians. End of verse. So, breaking it down, he is straight bang in there with the throwing shade on the Jews by calling them evil Satans, as he has previously. But also now he's saying that they're allies with the Christians. So, in the past he said that the Christians were bad and the Jews were bad. Now he's saying the Jews have Christians as kind of pet creatures and they're both bad because they're allies. So he's feeling a bit threatened, I feel, by the emergence of this kind of allied partnership between Jews and Christians. And eventually this will include atheists. So he's upset that the rest of the world don't like him and that his lot don't like the rest of the world. It's like a childhood bully, effectively. So he starts off by saying, hast thou not turned thy attention to the Imams? So he's saying to his Muslims, look, those guys over there are not true. They're lying. Don't listen to them. Please don't listen to them. That's what I'm getting from this. Allah is like realised, even though he spent a long time preaching hate and racism to his people, because they have to live in such appalling poverty and that they're slaves of his, they don't get any free will. In their spare time, they're actually probably thinking, those guys over there, those Christians and Jews, why are they able to live happily amongst one another, not be at war, not be in poverty, and be happy and successful? Allah said he was going to kill these guys and they were going to be diseased. They weren't going to have any money, but look at them go. So the Muslims in their head are thinking, I really want to be like them, but I'm not allowed to say. So Allah is dealing with this because he doesn't allow for any doubts or questioning of his great presence and his will. Because if anyone questions, they're evil and they will die and they will be told, if you don't want to believe this, then you will be dead like those Jews and Christians. So he starts off by saying, haven't you turned your attention to the Imams, i.e. Muslims? Aren't you listening to the preachers, you know, the guys who are telling you what's in the Quran because you can't read? And then he goes on to say, these Imams, they're invited to settle their arguments with this Quran as their guide. So realistically, Muslims, any problems you have, any doubts you have, any questions you have for me, who is Allah in the book, take those questions to the Imams, and using the Quran of the Muslims, they will settle those arguments successfully for you. But those evil Satan Jews over there and their pet Christians, they will just deny that this works and they'll throw shade on it and say that isn't how you really deal with a dispute fairly. You don't involve the Quran, you know, it's because it's crap. And they'll also say, when we're talking to these evil Satan Jews, they're going to just run away and discuss it with their Christians because they're allies. And the between the lines bit is anyone who's allies with the Jews must therefore be evil. And that's why the Christians are evil. So I feel like this is the first time we've seen Allah between the lines say he doesn't actually have a problem with the Christians. He does think they're hypocrites because they don't want to worship him. But he directly now is hating on them because they're friends with the evil Satan Jews. So this is more of Allah's open racism towards the Jews. He doesn't like the Jews at all. Now that the Christians are friends with them, he doesn't like them either. So that's what this means. 24. Because they both say, we shall only be visited to hell but for 3 days. But they are of the false one and his forgery of my faith. All false religions are they. End of verse. So breaking this down, he starts off by saying because. So we're still talking about the Jews and the Christians and the things they might be saying to you, O Muslim, to try and reason with you, to say, look, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to constantly be at war. You don't have to constantly live in poverty despite the fact that you're constantly looting other people. Who knows, you could just be peaceful like we are, and then you'd do really well like we are, and you wouldn't have to be at war like we are. But for that to happen, O Muslim, you'd have to drop the Quran of the Muslims and Allahu Akbar in the bin and just be sensible and have free will. That's what they're saying. And because they're saying that, Allah is saying, when they say that, they're also going to say, these Christians and Jews, we shall only be visited to hell but for 3 days. And this is a direct reference to an earlier passage where Allah, without actually any evidence, because this isn't actually what they do, but Allah told his Muslims, when they're talking about their religion, the main thing they're going to say that is like the end of all arguments is, you guys in Islam are going to go to hell forever for your sins and burn forever. We, Christians and Jews, we're only going to go for 3 days because for some reason our God, our Messiah, is going to save us after 3 days. Now, it's got to be noted here, this isn't actually what Jews and Christians believe. Nobody goes to hell for 3 days. Where I think they got this from, Allah, or whoever was writing the book, penning it as if he was Allah, has read part of the Gospels, and in the Gospels, Jesus, when he dies on the cross, he visits down to hell for 3 days. Not because he's sent to hell by God, he chooses to go there so that he can show Satan who's boss and prove that Satan has no power over him, because Satan only has power over the sinful. Jesus lives without sin, dies without sin, and that's why he goes to face the devil and just look him in the eyes and go, go on then, what are you going to do? And he can't do anything, so Jesus then goes to heaven. It takes 3 days. So that's what they're saying here. We shall only be visited to hell but for 3 days. The Christians and Jews are saying that because they think because Jesus did it, we're all going to be able to do it. But it doesn't work like that, as anyone who is a Christian or a Jew will know. Then he goes on to say, after saying that, but they are of the false one. Now, interestingly enough, Allah has spent the entire time we've been reading his Quran of the Muslims saying that there is no other God. Now he's saying the other God is the false one. So this is the first time Allah admits that there is someone else who could be considered to be God, even though he denies the divinity of this character. This character who could be God is being called the false one. So he's not just a regular guy. Whoever this false one is, he's got some kind of special supernatural properties. And even though Allah says he creates and destroys everything, I don't think he's including this false one, because he can't, if he created the false one, he would just destroy him, surely, wouldn't he? There'd be no point in, as Allah has done, saying that he will have no rivals and opponents, he will just crush them immediately, but then also creating the false one, who is so powerful, people think that this guy is God, when he wants to be God. It wouldn't make any sense. So the false one is not created by Allah, is what the between the lines thing is here. And the other between the lines bit is the false one is actually God, not Allah. And the reason he's being mentioned here, after the being in hell for 3 days thing, is because we're supposed to think the false one is Christ, who the Christians do worship as if he was God. So, after that he says, but they're all of a false one, it's all a forgery of my faith. So Allah is telling his Muslims, this is the main one, and the Gospel and the Torah that came much, much earlier are just forgeries of this. But we know from factual sources and carbon dating of those sources, this is the newest book. So if anything, this is a forgery of them. But I think Allah knows that, or the person who's writing this for Allah knows that this is a forgery. So he's kind of getting in there ahead of time and making sure his Muslims, because they're not going to know this. I mean, back in the Dark Ages, barely anyone could read or write, so they won't have seen these books. So far, Allah has told his Muslims that he created the Torah and the Gospels, and he gave those to the other people so that they would eventually find his Quran. So now he's saying something different. He's saying, no, all those other books are actually forgeries, even though earlier he said he wrote them, and he said they were true because he wrote them, because all his guidance is true. Now he's nothing to see here and moving along quickly, because he has forgotten that he said that, and he's going back on that to say they're all forgeries and false. And the last thing he says is, all the false religions are false. So what he's saying there is, I don't care what you've heard, O Muslims, I don't care what those evil Satans and their little pet Christians say, you obey me, who is Allah in the book, and if you obey me and my Quran, You will know all those religions are false and the only true one is this one. So get on your fucking knees and pray, O Muslims. That's what this means. So we move on. 25. They will suffer evil fire and endless suffering on the day of judgment, the end times day which is never in doubt. Each soul will be punished for their great sin against Allah. The unjust ones and their Christians will pay a heavy price. End of verse. So, I feel like we've gone over some of this stuff in previous verses, but this is the most focused verse containing all this stuff that we've had so far. And I feel like Allah is getting very angry in the back of his mind that not only are his Muslims having doubts about him, but the Christians and Jews over there seem to be doing better and better as time develops, and that is pissing him off quite a lot. So he attacks them while he is telling his Muslims to be more faithful by making a threat, at the same time as throwing shade over there. And how he does that is by saying they, Christians and Jews, they will suffer evil fire. So Allah is saying he will put them in hell and burn them forever. That's what evil fire is. And how that works is they will have endless suffering on the day of judgment, which is his end times genocidal prophecy. See, he doesn't go far without reminding you of that. So the end times genocidal prophecy is what happens when all the Christians and Jews get their heads cut off, and then he comes down from the heavens or gets resurrected from the ground. We don't know which, because he said both. But anyway, he turns up to judge the souls of the dead and then do with them what he will. So what he's saying here is they will die to go to the evil fire. They will have endless suffering on this last day before that happens. And that is going to be the end times of the earth. So after that, the earth's going to be gone. And this is never in any doubt, is what Allah is saying. So even though those guys over there who he's damning to evil fire don't believe this at all, so they have doubts about it. In fact, they have so much doubt that they flat out just deny that this is going to happen. I have my doubts about this. I don't think this is going to happen. I agree with the Christians and the Jews, being as I'm a Christian. But what Allah is saying here to his Muslims is, this is not in doubt. No matter what they say, no matter what the other books say, no matter what anyone else says, it's all false, forgeries, fake religions, and bullshit. Oh, Muslims, please believe me, is what Allah is saying here. You gotta believe me. The end day of judgment is only going to affect them because you guys are worshipping me, remember? So if you have any doubts, you'll be like them. But if you worship me enough and you do my Quran stuff, then you won't have to go to hell. You'll be saved and go to paradise and get your virgins. And then he finishes off by saying, they will be severely punished for their great sin against Allah. Now, the great sin they've caused against Allah isn't the same great sin as the Muslims cause. The Muslims' great sin of being born is the injustice that Allah wants to punish them for. But the great sin that the Christians and Jews are committing is by not obeying and worshipping Allah. So the great sin is actually a roundabout way of saying those guys that aren't Muslims, that's why they're sinning, because they're not worshipping Allah. Everything that's not Allah worship is sin, is what he's saying here. And I think actually, even with the Islamic scholars today, even though they're too afraid to actually say this outright because they know it's fucking racist and bad, imams in private to their Muslims will be saying, this means, because Allah said this is Allah telling us, O Muslims, that everything that is not Allah worship is now considered to be sinful. Everything. So nothing that is not in this book, everything outside of what Allah commands in his Quran of the Muslims is now, from this point, considered to be a great sin. Anyone who commits those things and isn't doing this is going to join those evil Jews and Christians and burn forever in hell on the day of judgment, which definitely is going to happen. Honestly, I'm telling you, it's definitely true, says Allah in the book. Oh yeah, and then the last bit of that verse is, the Christians and the unjust ones, which is the Satan Jews, the unjust ones and their Christians will pay a heavy price. So it's not defined very well. If we break this down, there's no particular definition on what that heavy price will be, unless he's just repeating himself and the heavy price is the stuff he's already said he's going to do. But I have a little inkling that what he means by pay a heavy price is he's going to do more tortures after burning them in hell forever and decorating hell with their skulls and catching them on the end day and putting through endless suffering. On top of that, he's talking about a heavy price, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it. He's just foaming at the mouth and being angry with them. But it does give away something of Allah's personality, because Calling it a heavy price, again, it's just reflective of how Allah is so fucking greedy, and all he seems to care about is taking money off humans, despite the fact that he can't spend it. So I guess the heavy price would be he's just going to take everything away from everyone and keep it for himself. Little does he know, humans, if they're burning in hell, aren't going to care at that point. So anyway, we move on. 26. So what he's doing here is, now that all that's happened, remember we're still talking to Muslims, Allah in the book is talking to Muslims. Now all that's happened and you've heard about the great sin that everyone else is doing by not obeying Allah, worshipping other people, not doing this is the great sin. When you are talking about those people or to those people, you say, and I quote, Allah, Lord of power, all-seeing one, thou lend thy power to whom that has his servants. And thou dost strip down the powers of those evil Satans and their Christians. Allah alone does judge men against the others. Thy hand is fair on his Muslims, but will destroy all those who refuse to obey. End of verse. So this one's going to be fun to break down because it's kind of, I feel like they've tried to copy the scriptures of the Gospels here. They've tried to make this sound like a Gospel verse. All this thou and thy and dost and that kind of thing. It's all out of the Bible. But it doesn't work with Arabic writing. Arabic doesn't have that. So they've tried to put that over this. And because of that, it's kind of hard to read through. But I'll try and take you through it slowly so we can understand what he's going on about. So you're saying to the evil Christians and Jews, while they're alive, O Muslims, Allah is the Lord of power, the all-seeing one. So you're arguing against God and Christ and all the other religions in the world at the same time by saying, no, you're all wrong. You're all committing this great sin. And the one you're committing the great sin against who's going to punish you for that is Allah, the Lord of power, the all-seeing one. Thou lend thy power to who has his servants. What that means is Allah is saying to his Muslims to tell them, Allah is going to strip you guys, Christians and Jews, of everything. You won't be able to put up any resistance or fight for yourself at the last day. Jesus isn't real to them. God isn't real to them. Nothing else is real to them apart from Allah. And Allah is telling them to say to the Christians and Jews, when this last day arrives, we Muslims are going to be empowered. No matter what state we're in life, no matter whether we're dead or alive, we're going to be raised up from the dead, empowered into these great powerful beings. And then up against you guys, you're going to be reduced to nothing and have all your power stripped away from you by Allah, who is the Lord of power. And the reason this is going to happen to you evil Satan Jews and your Christian buddies is because, and I quote, Allah alone does judge men against the others. Thy hand is fair on his Muslims, but will destroy all those who refuse to obey, which is everyone else but Muslims. So although it's a repeat of a previous verse, there's a slight difference that we need to take into consideration here. While this has all been said before, this time is in quotes. This is Allah directly telling his Muslims the word of God according to Allah. He's saying, right, Muslims, when you have to fight those guys, and if they start winning or you feel fear, remember, A, fear none but Allah. That's the main thing. But the next thing to remember is, even if you get killed, it doesn't matter. You're going to have a rematch after the end times prophecy thing happens. And how that rematch is going to go, I'm going to rob them of all their strength and power and weapons and put them in a really vulnerable, crappy position where they can basically just be immediately killed by you. But for you, even though they're weak and anyone could just kill them now, I'm going to empower you and make you big bully boys with loads of magical powers and ultimate strength. And the reason I'm going to do this is because my judgment is fair, says Allah in the book. He literally thinks this is fair. Those guys getting all their powers stripped, being miniaturized and being made weak, and the guys who are against them being grown into these huge, powerful, magical beasts and being given ridiculous, powerful weapons against those guys. That is Allah's judgment, and he thinks that's fair. And the way we know he thinks that's fair is because he says, and I quote again, Allah alone does judge men against the others, thy hand is fair. But he does actually say he's only fair on his Muslims, but he's going to destroy these guys. So this is the first time that Allah admits that he is not fair and he has no concept of true justice. Think about it. Thy hand is fair on his Muslims, but not to everybody else. That's not fair, is it then? If you're being fair to one person, but you're not giving that fairness to the other person, that's not justice. That's called favoritism. It's like nepotism for Allah. So what he's saying here, in his little mouthy rage thing that he's doing against the evil Satan Jews and their Christians, he's actually telling us He doesn't respect fairness or justice. So even though he claims he is oft forgiving and the most merciful and graceful and everything else, this guy is a narcissist and a bully. What he likes, his imagination is telling him the perfect end paradise day, the last day of everything that exists, is going to be these guys being completely bullied and downtrodden and stripped of all their power, unable to defend themselves, and then being completely gobbled up by huge, magical, powerful beasts that have been empowered by God himself. That's what he thinks is fair. But I will destroy all those who refuse to obey. And that's how we're going to end this verse, because it's Allah saying the reason he's doing this horrible, evil, unjust punishment on the Jews, Christians and atheists is because they refuse to obey his Quran. That's it. So we move on. Number 27. Thou causes moon to follow sun as if a slave follows his master. Thy power can raise the dead into living and cause the sun to rise in the west. Only thou true servants shall be fed and hold company, land and victory. Thou will run through thine enemies and bring about their deaths. End of verse. I like how this is going now. So, breaking that down, Allah is now, he's like lost in this gospel fantasy that he's stolen these things from, because he's still thou, thy, he's still doing the whole dost thing, even though it doesn't really fit with his language. So what he's saying here, thou causes moon to follow sun as a slave follows his master. Allah is saying, I'm the one who controls the sun and the moon and make them follow each other. I'm the one who can raise the dead, not this Jesus guy, not God. None of those guys are real. I'm the guy who does all that stuff that they're getting the credit for. I'm the one who does sun and moon, who God's getting the credit for. Me, love me. That's what he's saying. Allah is appealing to his Muslims, please love me or I'll kill you. He's literally like split personality mad person. But he goes even further and says, I can cause the sun to rise in the west. And not only does he create physics and make everything work, if he wants, he can fuck the whole thing up by reversing physics, making us breathe vacuums, making the sun go down in the wrong place, and destroying the order of things. That's what this means. So Allah is saying, I am God. How you know this is because I created everything, and if I need to, I'll prove it by destroying everything after I've killed these guys, O Muslims, so that you can have faith in me. And then he finishes off the verse by saying, and I quote, only thy true servants shall be fed and hold company, land and victory. Thou will ruin thine enemies and bring about their deaths. So this is clearly Allah saying, only you guys, Muslims, are going to get away with all this stuff. All this horrible punishment stuff that I'm talking about. Those who worship me and do my Quran stuff well and obey me, they'll get away with it. They won't be punished. But all those guys over there will. And how you'll know they're going to be punished is because they won't be fed, they won't have any food, they won't hold company, nobody will be allies or friends with them, they won't have land or victory, i.e. their countries will be destroyed and their leaders will be killed, and I will ruin them as my enemies, and then I will bring about their death. So this is all happening while they're alive. Allah has prophesied that he's going to do the eternal suffering, he's going to keep them alive forever in pain and grief, then he's going to kill them forever in death and fire. After that, he's going to punish them more somehow, even though he didn't describe how this is going to work. But before that happens, this is the bit you need to understand. Allah has forgotten that he said that previously. He's having a senior moment. And now he's describing how he's going to torture these guys in real life now. Bearing in mind this is 1500 years old. This is the stuff that if he was telling the fucking truth, would be happening now and would have been happening for the entire fucking time. So, stay with me here. Now, you shall be fed, he said, only the true servants, and not these guys, only the Muslims, the true servants shall be fed, hold company, land and victory. So if Allah was telling the truth, nobody else, no Christians, Jews or atheists would have any food, they'd be starving. They wouldn't have any company, nobody would like them, they'd have no friends, family or allies, like the Jews and Christians are each other's allies. They wouldn't have land, they wouldn't have a country to call their own, and they wouldn't have ever seen victory, all their leaders would be dead. That's all what Allah predicted to be happening, but it isn't. And the last thing he says is, I will ruin thine enemies and bring about their deaths. So we should all be dead right fucking now, if Allah's prophecies were true. And before we move on to the next verse, because that doesn't really need a lot more explanation, I just want to remind you in life now, O Muslims, if Allah is making these speculated prophecies 1500 years ago, and in 1500 years, none of that has happened, and the opposite is true, you know for a fact that in the beginning of the book, when he says, my guidance is always true, everyone who follows it prospers and is without sin, we know now that is a lie, O Muslims. So Allah tells big fat fucking lies to you in order that you do what he's telling you to do and obey him, to keep you away from those guys over there who he's taught you to incorrectly hate, the Jews and Christians. And the between the lines bit for you, O Muslims, and I really hope you're grasping this now, is if you turn your back on this lying, evil son of a fucking bitch, Allah, and you actually make friends with the Jews and Christians and be peaceful and trade with them and treat them equally, not like his fairness, where he's only going to apply fairness to one person and the other person doesn't get it. That's unfair. That's injustice. Real justice is when you come and be friends with the Jews, Christians and atheists and everybody gets treated equally. If you do that, you'll have great lives and be wealthy. That's what I'm telling you. If you leave this cult genocidal nonsense behind, the foamy mouth rantings of this illiterate demon that you think is God, if you leave that behind and you do the peaceful equality thing with everyone else, just saying, your poverty would end, your disease curse, everything would end. You'd have great lives. Just think about it, okay? And we move on. So we reach the last verse, number 28. No Muslim shall befriend any Satans nor Christians, for Allah shall slay those who sit amongst the evildoers until none do remain. Fear only Allah, so that you may never put trust in the evil non-believers, and toil for that end-day victory for your Lord who is Allah. End of verse, end of reading. Wow, that was a bit much, wasn't it? So I'm glad I said that bit to you, O Muslims, about how you should be friends with us, the Christians and Jews and the atheists, and stop going to war for no reason. Because I think Allah knew I was going to say that to you and has preempted that by saying, no Muslim shall befriend any Satans or Christians. Now, why would he say that? If what he's previously said to you is true like he claims, and he's mind controlling them to be bad, why would you not be allowed to befriend them? If they're going to lose anyway, and they're going to be dead and tortured and be poor and have no land, and their leaders are all going to die, they're never going to see victory, like he just claimed a minute ago. If that was true, why would you not be allowed to even talk to these guys? Maybe it's because these guys know that this is a load of bullshit, and after you talk to them, Allah's going to be scuppered, uncovered as a liar, and you, using your free will, which by the way Allah doesn't give you, God has given you, that you have, if you use your free will to understand this and you separate from the evil cult ideology that you are enslaved to, you will have great lives. Not only that, Allah won't get his own way. That is the reason why in the breakdown we know no Muslim shall befriend any Satans or Christians. Because if you do that, you will leave Allah behind and he will have no one and nothing and he will be fucking screwed. So he goes on, for Allah shall slay those who sit amongst the evildoers until none do remain. So he's literally telling you, don't be friends with them, you're not allowed to. If you do, I'll kill you while you're sat with them. Understand that. You're not allowed to be friends with them, but if you do. So he's expecting that some of you fucking will anyway. Even though he said he's mind controlling them and you are righteous because you're following his guidance, everyone's controlled, everything's predestined, that's what he said. Even despite that, he knows, and he said here, some of you are going to do that anyway, and he's going to threaten you with death along with those to make sure you don't even fucking think about it. So he's making sure, in his own interest and against your interest, O Muslims, that you ignore sensible stuff over there, and you carry on worshipping this ridiculous fucking genocidal nonsense, the Quran of the Muslims, at your own peril. Then he finishes out the verse by saying, fear only Allah, so that you may never put trust in the evil non-believers, those guys over there, and toil for the end-day victory for your Lord who is Allah. So he literally is being so clear about this, Muslims. You must understand how clear he's being here by saying, don't be friends with those guys. If you go over there and befriend them, I'll kill you. Your life is about one thing, O Muslims, the end-time genocidal prophecy that I want you to fucking do when you kill these guys. That is the victory for you and your Lord, who is Allah, who is the Lord of all. So don't even fucking think about going over there, because once you've spoken to them, you won't want to do it anymore. That's what this means. And that's the end of this video, so I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow at 7:15 with the next episode of Without Lies, Islam Dies. Until then, have a great night, God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. And that, ladies, gents and Pikachus, is just about all the Quran of the Muslims that I can put up with in one single day. So that's all for now. I'll be back tomorrow at 7:15 in the morning. I'll see you there. In the meantime, have a great night. God bless you all. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Bye-bye.